Coming up next on Pennsylvania Newsmakers, we'll get the very latest from the state capitol on the budget discussions. But first, flu season is arriving. We will talk with a family physician and board member with the Pennsylvania Medical Society about vaccinations and what your family needs to know. That's coming up next on Pennsylvania Newsmakers.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host.
Hello, I'm Steve Aaron, this week's guest host on Pennsylvania Newsmakers. In a recent effort to strengthen vaccine accessibility across Pennsylvania, Governor Josh Shapiro issued an executive order aimed at approving access to immunizations for all Pennsylvanians. Joining us to discuss vaccines in the Commonwealth is Dr. Andrew Lutzkanin, a family physician in Dauphin County and a trustee with the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Glad to have you with us, Doctor.
Glad to be with you this morning.
So I mentioned the action the governor's taken. I understand that in support of his initiative, both the State Board of Medicine and the State Board of Osteopathic Medicine voted to endorse immunization guidance provided by the state health department. What's happening at the federal level that's requiring, these kinds of actions to be taken at this point in time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So earlier this year at the federal level, the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices was actually gutted by Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and where there used to be experts from across fields like pediatrics, family medicine, immunology, virology, he has replaced this with a group of vaccine skeptics. So they actually met recently here to discuss the vaccine schedule, as they do periodically throughout the year. And they started to make changes in what was a evidence-based, science-backed immunization schedule that kept kids and adults safe from preventable diseases, and now is starting to cause some doubt in that schedule.
And it seems to be coming at a troubling time, right? Because we're entering kind of flu season and the time of year when we want to encourage folks across Pennsylvania to be getting, flu vaccines and obviously regular vaccinations. What's the potential impact on this? What, as a family physician, what are you hearing and what are your concerns about people's willingness to get their vaccines?
Yeah, so I think that this, it casts a level of doubt on the effectiveness and the safety of vaccines. And let me be clear, the science behind vaccines is proven. Vaccines are the single most effective way to prevent illness for you, for your family, for your community. And they have a long proven safety record. They are some of the most extensively studied medications or prescriptions that we're able to offer to our patients, and should not really be any cause for doubt. But when these types of actions happen at the federal level, people aren't sure who they should turn to for advice regarding which vaccines they should or should not receive and when they should receive them.
Doctor, are you and your colleagues at your practice hearing from more patients who are coming in, who are, hearing from this new advisory panel and the changes that have been made at the CDC, who are just questioning things that maybe these are questions you never necessarily received before? Like, are you seeing that in your practice?
I am starting to see a little bit more. Every year I do have some questions over, young, healthy people ask me if they really need a flu shot, which they do. But I am seeing more questioning of things like flu shots, particularly COVID boosters. Have been really called into question here. The new guidance is now recommending that folks have a conversation with their doctor and weigh the risks and benefits. And while I have no problem with my patients coming and talking to me, in fact, I'd rather them talk to me than get their information from social media or untrusted sources online. It's enough to cast some doubt that really does put more vulnerable people at risk.
Talk about that new COVID-19 guidance that we heard. That's something that just came out in the last several days, where prior it seemed like if you were interested in getting your booster, you could work directly with your pharmacy, what forth to do that. But now there's a change that you now do need to go talk to a healthcare professional first. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. And in previous years, the COVID booster, seasonal COVID virus boosters were recommended basically for everybody, infants from the age of 6 months all the way up to older adults, we're recommended to get a seasonal booster, just like you get a flu shot every fall. The newer language that's come from the CDC, which was just approved actually earlier this week, states that for adults 65 and over, vaccines should be based on individual-based decision-making, or what we call shared clinical decision-making in our field. And for individuals that are 6 months to 64, that same individual decision-making with an emphasis on risk-benefit of vaccination, which, in my opinion, and the opinion of the collective vaccine experts, is that the risk of COVID outweighs any risk of getting the vaccine. So this new guidance just puts a little layer of doubt into these, and COVID-19 vaccines have already been politicized too much. Billions of doses have been given all over the world. They are effective and they are safe.
Very good. We're going to continue our conversation with the doctor from the Pennsylvania Medical Society, Andrew Lutzkanin, right after this.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. We're going to continue our conversation with Dauphin County family physician, Dr. Andrew Lutzkanin, who is on the Board of Trustees with the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Doctor, do you think that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Department of Health, the administration has done enough to try to counter some of the concerns that you shared in our first segment about some of the changes at the CDC? Do you like the steps that have been taken at the state level?
Yeah, I do. I'm really pleased to see our governor really standing up for science and the effectiveness of vaccines. The Department of Health has been actively looking and monitoring this space. So taking steps to ensure that patients in the Commonwealth aren't going to have any access issues to be able to get the vaccines they need this season.
So we've talked about the flu vaccine. I've got mine coming up next week.
Yep.
But there are obviously a whole host of vaccines that are important to young children, families. What are the implications there? We focus more on the flu, but the other vaccines that we've all known for so many years, are we seeing any impact on families and making sure that young children are getting their vaccines?
Well, I mean, hopefully people have seen over the past couple of years the resurgence of measles outbreaks across the country. And fortunately, we have not had any significant outbreaks in the Commonwealth, at least not that I'm aware of at this point. But we are seeing more cases this year than we've seen in decades. And measles is sort of the canary in the coal mine because it requires such a high vaccination rate to provide protection for the total population. And so we look for about 95% of the population to be vaccinated. In 2020, 2021, when we looked at school students at kindergarten, 7th grade, and senior year of high school, greater than 95% in all three groups were vaccinated. Unfortunately, here in the 2024-2025 school year, only that senior class, those 12th graders, had greater than 95% protection. And what that means is that there's always a risk that we're going to start to see some of these illnesses again. There's diseases that honestly in my career I've not seen outside of a textbook or case reports from other parts of the world because of vaccines being so safe and almost eradicating that for us in the United States.
Do you think it's only a matter of time until we see the measles cases here in Pennsylvania, just given that trend line you're seeing, unfortunately?
Yeah, it's an alarming trend in an upward direction. I hope not. But we live in a much more interconnected society than we have ever before. And, it only takes one unvaccinated person traveling to another part of the country or another part of the world and picking it up. It's super contagious, the measles.
So how do we make that transition to get the public more comfortable again with vaccinations the way that we always used to be?
Well, I think what some important steps going forward. So number one is you have to trust the science. And I say trust, but science is a process. Science is a stepwise, methodical process where we try to learn new information. And the science, when it comes to vaccine safety and effectiveness, is unquestionable. We've got decades of research on vaccine safety and effectiveness going back for many, many years. And so really, there should not be any doubt that vaccines are safe and effective. Where there are questions, I think I would again encourage patients, talk to your doctor, see your family doctor, see your pediatrician. We have years of medical training behind us. We know how to look up new information. We know how to find the facts on all of these types of topics as they come up, and really should be your trusted source of information if you do have questions, rather than turning to social media or unverified sources on the internet.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Doctor, thank you so much for being with us and sharing these insights on the importance of vaccines. Coming up next on Newsmakers, we'll turn our attention to the state capitol in Harrisburg. We'll be right back.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, visit crossstate.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
And welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. I am pleased to be joined by Kara Jeffers, reporter with Lilly Broadcasting, to bring us some insights into our state capitol, where we just hit recently the 100-day impasse mark without a state budget. How would you characterize the mood in the capitol this week?
I feel like maybe vocalizing frustrations that have been there all along. Still some civility happening as well, but we had both our House and our Senate was in Harrisburg this week, which has been a while since that has happened. So it was kind of reaching this point on Wednesday where everyone had been there for 3 days, and we still, we were reaching that 100-day mark. Nothing had officially happened. And so Wednesday there was all sorts of press conferences, all sorts of accusations and annoyances being thrown out. The House did pass a budget bill, $50.25 billion, significantly less than what Governor Josh Shapiro proposed back in February, a little bit less than something that they sent over in July. However, it wasn't agreed to with Senate Republicans, so it ended up just kind of passing, and now it's sitting there and everyone went home.
Got it. So even though there was an effort made, it doesn't seem like it brought either side any closer together?
Not at this time. We actually had even some Senate Republican leadership saying on Wednesday that because of all the things that are being said and the way that things are being communicated, like, oh, this has set progress back and not forward. If that remains true, that, remains to be seen. As of right now, the Senate is scheduled to come back in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, it is communities, it's counties, nonprofits, schools, all sorts of organizations that are suffering as state funding is frozen. And so that's the pressure that keeps applying. And
now you have the complicating factor of the federal government being at an impasse and shut down. And that's an unusual combination to have both state government and the federal. Do you get the sense that added complication is pushing any urgency, or it doesn't sound like it based on what just happened this past week?
I think there is honestly people get in their little silos of I'm focused on the state government. Governor Josh Shapiro has been talking about the federal impact. They're getting, instructions from the Office of Budget Management. We do have, I want to say he said it's around 10,000 federal employees, kind of linked employees that are working within the state. So there is questions about how their jobs are going to be impacted. But at this time, no, it's not really we're not sure what's going to up the ante and bring that pressure up to actually get something across the finish line.
So you mentioned the nonprofits and other organizations that are feeling the pain here. The State Treasurer Garrity put forward a proposal, or actually took some action this past week for some low-interest loans. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is a few weeks ago. Garrity put out these basically budget bridge loans where counties and Head Start programs, which is kind of like a child care program, were able to go and apply for like 25% of what they would normally get from the state. And it came with a 4% interest rate. And that's kind of the thing, as this budget impasse goes on, all these organizations are like, how are we going to fill in the gap? We might get back pay, but even if we take out loans, we have to pay this interest, and the interest is never covered. So that was something that happened this week. There was a bill in the Senate that did pass that would allow Garrity to basically offer this loan with that 4% interest, but then forgive the interest, which is kind of helpful. Senate Democrats were complaining, though, that possibly the whole program is not quite legally upstanding. We'll see how that kind of politically goes forward as well.
Interesting. We'll use that as a transition to our next segment. Treasurer Garrity was the focus of a recent Quinnipiac poll that just came out about her running for governor and how she might fare against Governor Shapiro. So we're going to take a break here, and when we return, we will have continuing our conversation with Kara Jeffers and take a look at some of those new poll results in Pennsylvania right after this.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania American Water. We keep life flowing across the Keystone State.
Welcome back to Pennsylvania Newsmakers. So continuing our conversation with Kara Jeffers from Lilly Broadcasting. We alluded to a new Quinnipiac University poll that just came out. Interesting that Governor Shapiro's approval status hit 60%. I was privileged to work for a governor back in the day, Tom Ridge, who had similarly high approval numbers, but we really haven't seen numbers quite that high with governors. What's your take on that?
Yeah, even in the poll, they were saying like this is higher. Like I think his previous was like 59%, so he kind of keeps beating himself, right? It shows. I remember being just on the election campaign stuff all of last year and talking to Republicans and Democrats. You'd find moderates who are kind of like, yeah, I like Shapiro. I think he's doing good. So clearly, I mean, this is just numbers reflecting that attitude that you can see when you kind of like walk the streets and talk with members of the community.
Right. They also took a look at a potential governor's race in 2026, which would be Governor Shapiro, and the leading Republican at the moment is State Treasurer Garrity, who we talked about. And looks like those numbers right now have Shapiro in the lead, 55-39. I can't imagine that's all that surprising given his approval ratings and her just kind of entering the race, right?
Yeah, like a 16-point difference is definitely some ground to gain. I also noticed for the poll that when it talked just kind of about like popularity, when people got to Garrity, they were like 73%, I think, were like, I just don't know enough to have an opinion. So definitely going into this race, I think her challenge is going to be, can I get that name recognition up with a governor who is not just like, you know, making news traveling around the state, but is making efforts to be on the national stage as well.
Right. And they took a look, speaking of that, they took a look at the 2028 presidential race and what's happening. And, you know, if the Governor Shapiro were to run against a Vance, for example, that Shapiro leads Vance, 53-43, if that was a race that were to develop, you know, right? What do we learn from that, do you think?
As I believe the poll said, you know, Pennsylvania's son would win in Pennsylvania. Interestingly for that, it was the independents. You know, Democrats were like for Shapiro, Republicans were for Vance. Independents had a pretty big gap where Shapiro was leading Vance in that. And those are usually the voters that people are wanting to focus on. So it will be interesting to see how the next, 3 years of the presidential national elections possibly influences how Vance is perceived, and then also Shapiro, for governor and any future aspirations.
I think in any statewide or national race, obviously the economy is always a key driver, and then the poll took a closer look at that. This was interesting in the poll when asked whether Pennsylvania's economy has gotten better since President Trump became president in January, or whether it's gotten worse. 41% of voters say it has gotten worse, compared to 21% that say it's gotten better. So obviously we've got the midterms that are going to be coming up congressionally, and the impact of that. That's going to be an interesting number to keep our eye on, I think.
Yeah, I think it comes back to this reality that we love to blame our economies and economics on whoever is in charge at the moment. And really, they point to much long-term trends. There's inflation that happened with COVID, with shutdowns, with things that have happened in the past few years, that those numbers are going to stay up. So people aren't going to see those coming down. And that's the question for our politicians. Do you lean into this long-term reality, or how do you shake it? Can they make enough changes nationally or at the state level to kind of turn some of these economic numbers around?
The poll also took a look at our senators, McCormick and Fetterman. Any insights that you gleaned from any of those numbers?
Definitely seeing that Fetterman, I believe it kind of had the head title of he's actually growing in popularity with GOP, kind of losing some popularity with the Democratic Party. I think it shows how Democrats in general right now are trying to figure out what is their strategy going into midterms, like you mentioned. And I believe Fetterman is being, one example of one strategy of how do we, cast a broad net, try to bring as many people in. We'll have to see if it worked.
Yeah. As you talk to people in the Capitol and you have your conversations with others, what do you think what's keeping their attention right now? Is it just trying to figure out a solution to the budget and how we move forward? Are they already thinking about the midterms in 26 and that's got their attention? Is it how do we maintain control of majorities in the House and the Senate, which are very close, right? And the Senate is projected to perhaps get even closer. What's your sense over these next kind of 6 to 12 months where the focus is going to be?
I think there is enough pressure, communications from communities, from districts, from voters about the budget. This is the first time that we've gone this long with a budget impasse since 2015. So we kind of hear about this like, oh, budgets are always late. This is the first time in 10 years that it's been this late, and it's having real impacts on counties, on schools, on these nonprofits. We talk about rape crisis centers that are really struggling to keep their doors open right now. And I think there is enough pressure coming from that lawmakers are staying focused on it with these other things of the midterms kind of rolling in the background. How do we tie that into this current pressure?
It's interesting that Quinnipiac survey took a look at that and who's to blame for the budget impasse. And it seemed like they were equally divided between R's and D's, right, as to who's actually to blame for it. So it'll be very interesting to keep tracking this. We're going to stop it there. Kara, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
Appreciate it as always. That's it for this edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.